Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Erudition Network. Welcome to the Erudition Network Black History and Interactive History Session, Knowledge Session. I'm your host, Eddie Phillips. We are here tonight. I wasn't here last Thursday, so I wanted to make sure I was on this Thursday to kind of make up for me not being here last week. But we are live. If this is your first time with this program is our weekly interactive Black history session where we discuss things on Black history and touch on things that maybe you were not taught about or may not remember or don't have a really good grasp on as far as Black history goes. All right, but we are here every Thursday, and I'm on here tonight for that purpose and for that reason. Hopefully we will get people in. This is an interactive program, and we try with this interactive program to encourage you to ask questions on things and to opine, have an opinion or have a thought on some of the things that we discuss. And I encourage you to drop that within the chat, whether you're watching us on YouTube or whether you're watching us on Facebook. And so that you may be your opinions and your thoughts and things can be heard. When you join us, please let us know that you're watching so that we know and we can speak to you interactively. I'm gonna give a few, maybe like a minute or two to see if let people catch up, let people get in here onto the program. Sometimes that bill or whatever you set up to let you know to join the program is a little slow. I've known it to be a little slow. And people come in maybe like 5 or 6 minutes after the fact, and that's fine. But I like to try to give a little bit of time for people to be able to do that so that we can have an interactive session and we can gain something from these sessions. I see my brother is here. Hey, Emmanuel, good to see you. It's my little bro. Hey, tell Samnisha I said happy birthday. I didn't get a chance to send anything out earlier today. I know it's her birthday today. That's my sister-in-law that's in that picture that you see right there. Tell her I said hello and happy birthday. But I definitely want people to interact and gain something from the program. Too often we get this thing where people are they're telling us things about history that are not necessarily factual. And so I really like this program because we get a chance to counter those thoughts in real time, interactively. And I think that is one of the benefits and one of the things that I like really about doing Erudition on Thursdays, because I really do believe that it helps, right? It greatly helps people to understand. I'm having a little problem with the computer right here. All right. But let me get this thing here. I'm going to send out something real quick. I usually do this once we start the show, but it was giving me a problem and I just got an error message back. So I'm going to do this right now. Um, you will notice that I titled this particular program, this one, um, we titled it um, Africa for Kids. And there's a reason why I titled it that way. Um, it has been incumbent upon me that we have to do a better job in teaching our young folks as well as ourselves. But we have to do a better job of teaching. We're not doing a stellar job, ladies and gentlemen, of making sure this next generation, these generations of young children, black, white, or whatever, um, really understand factual history. And because we've been dropping the ball on this, um, we're having these problems where people people are putting out fantasy, fiction, things that aren't true. And I want to make sure that we are doing better with this. Good to see you, Tony. Thank you, my brother, for joining us. Yes, we are live. And so tonight, I'm going to try to go into a little bit of that. And I hope that you will share this program and you will encourage the young people in your life um, to engage in their history. A little while back, when we started this program, one of my first primary ideas was that I really wanted this for young people. And we have a lot of people, older and younger people, who watch the program. But what we wanted was for people to gain something about his history and knowledge, something that you can take and you can share. I want you to be able to watch Erudition, and at the same time, when you watch it, either share it with your family, share it with others, and learn from it dynamically together. Uh, I am working on, we're doing a lot of work. I'm working on my book, and I would probably be done. If you don't know, I'm going to share with you. I wrote a book at the beginning of this year about early world history. Great book, 101 Black History Questions Challenge. Pretty decent sized book. If you don't have it, go get it on Amazon or Lulu. I will put the link later on in our chat. But one of the things that I wanted to do was I wanted to make sure that we can reach an audience. So as I'm working on this new book, it hit me that I needed to also start to chip away certain things as I create a book that is more designed for younger people. And so one of the things I want to do after the second book is to try to get something out here where we can start to put thoughts and things in young folks' minds that correlate them or connect them to the history and the world that we're seeing right now. In order to do that, we need to give them some things that are factual and truthful. My book gives you a lot of facts, but they might be upper high end facts that a younger child won't necessarily quickly understand. Not saying every child won't, but saying that we need to do something that will allow that. So that's something else that I'm working on right now. But tonight, I wanted to take the first foray into that and start by talking about Africa, Africa, for our young people, and giving them examples and things and places that can help them better understand Africa. You know, I like to do things through questions, and I find that when you ask questions, they create either more questions, but they definitely also give answers. And so one of the first questions that or first subjects I actually usually talk to young people about when we talk about Africa is, what did the indigenous people uh, call the land of Africa? What do we know from history that Africa, what was Africa's name? What was it termed to be? Before it was called Africa, which can be argued came from the Romans, right? That name. But what was the name that the indigenous people gave it? And or more importantly, what were the meanings of these names? So when I want you to take that question, we're going to get back to that because it just was reminded to me that I do. Usually when we start this show, we start it with questions, and I did not open it up, and I apologize for those of you who may have questions. So even though sometimes many of us do not, if you have any questions, and when I open up this part of the show, I usually do it in the beginning. It's whatever questions that you may have on history or whatever, something that is biting you, or something that has been on your mind that you would like to have answered and you want to share with us as an audience tonight. Please feel free. This is your time to do that. And ask any question that you would like to ask. We're open to it right now. I will give you a few moments to do that, and then we'll get back to my question. But I give you your opportunity to ask whatever question that you would like to ask. I ain't asked no questions until I sit my mind down and go to you. It's a pretty decent sized book. So over 200 some pages, and I get it, Tony. There's a lot of questions in there, and there's a lot of places to go with it. So, but any question, there might be something that's going on right now that you want a historical take on, or a thought on, and I'm open to that. I'll give it about another 40 seconds if you guys have any questions. If you don't, I'm gonna move on because I know we got a couple people in here right now, and I just want to make sure I give that time to you to do that. And while we're doing that, let me to close some things here. You know, you don't ever want your computer to get all stuck. All right. Let me see here. Let me close this. You know, you have so many things open that you have when you're trying to do a show. All right, got that closed. All right, guys. So I gave you time. What you got here? Okay, I see Tony. You did have a question. What is your question? Curious on history of Zionism and its global impact. Well, that's a good question, man. It's a pretty deep question too. That you're asking. You know, it's a thing. I really believe that right now we are having a major. I will refer you back a couple of weeks where I spoke or did a lesson on the Nagda and talking about the Palestinians and what they went through and how the Zionists influenced that in the 19th century and how all of that went down. But I will say that there is definitely an influence here right now, and to not be political, I will tell you right now that we are in we're in dangerous grounds right here. We're in very dangerous grounds right here. The migration that is encouraged by Zionism, the growth, the development, and how things grow, how they establish their security, all of those things that are fundamental to their movement are growing in areas, and it's influencing things. And unfortunately, what it's doing is it's also affecting people on a global thing, because now we're starting to see, I think we're one-siding it and not seeing how some of the anything can be, what am I trying to say? Anything can be wrong, right? Anything could be wrong. Ever since the British Mandate for Palestine in 1922, and I talk about that, we've really had some major issues. And so I like to do an entire lesson on that, Tony, other than give you some real quick answer with that question, but that is a very deep question. Is that the only question? I want to get back to that one. That's a little deeper than I have time for tonight. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, let me get this thing off of here, this banner off of here, and let's do some talking here. I asked a question a little bit ago at the beginning of the show. We asked that question about Africa. What were the names of Africa in its earlier times? There are many names. I know a lot of people. I ask those questions to see who knows, but if you don't, it's fine. It's not a critical thing. This is what this interactive is about. It's a discussion. Now, whether we call it Alkebulan, right, which is the term that many historians believe that a lot of, and I'm gonna put that in the chat, because I know when you say a name, let me make sure I'm spelling this right. Kubla, which is also is believed to mean the mother of creation, right? The mother of mankind, or the some people have said the original garden of Eden. Yes, you're absolutely right, Tony. And so it is an important term that I think that should be within our vocabulary. I think I put two U's in there when it was only one U, but that's fine. I'm trying to type fast, but it's something that we should know. There are other names that we see used in media and see used sometimes around. Kemet is one. Kemetic, that is something more Egyptian and comes more from the reference of the land of the black land, or the dark land, because of the fertile land along the Nile. That is what that is believed, or the Nile Valley, and so that is what that name comes from. The other one that you will see probably much in a lot of older books, a lot of Greek books, a lot of the Bible, and many other historic books, is Ethiopia. Africa was referred to as Ethiopia. Ethiopia was used as a general term. So when we teach our young people about Africa, the motherland, or the place of the birth of mankind, our start, those three names are important. We want to make sure that people know that Africa is not necessarily the full term, and it's not always something that's going to be referenced in ancient books. They may be referring to what we now will see as Africa, but they may refer to it as Ethiopia, Kemet, Alkebulan. They may name it in those different terms. And so I think that whenever I talk or start to talk about Africa, that's one of the first things I try to establish, because I want you to know, right, as you go through books, because we always want factual sources. We want sources that we can go to that are the primary. And so if we hit primary sources and we start reading things from Herodotus and different folks like that, Josephus and different, we will start to see that there were different names, but they all refer to the same place that we're looking at right now. Another thing that I wrote down some things. I'm going through my little list right here. Is why do we call, or why do we call? This is for our young folks. Why do we call Africa the motherland, or the mother of mankind, the mother of humanity, the land of humanity, the Garden of Eden, and so many other different terms and phrases. Why do we call it that? Why is Africa so named in that way? If you follow Tomb Raider, the Cradle of Humanity, different things like that. But all of these terms refer to what? Why do we refer to Africa as the motherland of humanity? I'm interested in any of you guys. I'm going to give you another chance to answer before I answer. Anybody? All right. Well, one of the reasons why we do it is because Africa quite literally is the place and the birthplace of humanity. Genetically, we can go and look at DNA tracers and see that that's where it started. We know, let me clarify something with you here right now. I am not a proponent or a supporter of hominids. You won't hear me go in about Australopithecus. You won't hear me go in about any of these hominid creatures that are mentioned in our historical studies. And the reason why I don't do that is because there is more than enough evidence to suggest that these things are not related to Homo sapiens or humans, but something that we have assigned to humanity in order to explain primordial evolution. And evolution in the theory of what Darwin had has a lot of holes in it that we're starting to see more and more of as we go through our through genetic study and things of that sort. So I don't want us to get lost in the rigmarole of that. Scientists have found just as many Homo sapien fossils, if not more, than any of the hominid fossils that they claim are come from our supposed apish ancestors. The fossils of Homo sapiens have been found in places like Ethiopia, right, Kenya, and so we know that human beings, as we know human beings, existed. And one of the reasons why we call Africa the cradle of life and the birth of humanity is because of the fossils, not of the hominids, but because of the fossils of the Homo sapiens, right? Of the earliest humans. We're not talking about Australopithecus afarensis, right? We're not talking about Lucy. We're not talking about, which people will always go to Lucy. But Lucy has been found to not necessarily be a Homo sapien. But if you were to go look at Kibish fossils in the Omo River of Ethiopia, you can see that these fossils are 195,000 years old and are among the fossils that we know are Homo sapien. And it affirms, or it suggests, and it validates that we know that human beings started in Africa. So when someone asks you as a young person and you say, well, how do you know? And somebody will say to you, I'm sorry if you're hearing voice in the background, they're doing some work in the back. But if you hear those that term Lucy, just remember that we have definitive proof, right? That 195,000 years ago, right, that they found fossils that date back, Homo sapiens, human beings, in Africa. In Africa. We don't need to validate it with a monkeyish creature. We don't need to do that. Right? And there are many more. I mean, we can go down to the Homo fossils, the Cebudu cave beddings that were found in South Africa. They're about 77,000 years old, and those show that Homo sapiens not only lived in these caves, but that they were smart enough to realize they didn't want bugs on them. So what they did is they created insect repellent bedding. They found plants that would keep insects away, so that's what they could lay on, and that in their domiciles, in their cave domiciles at the time. So again, it shows intelligence, and it shows something that directly goes along with who we are as human beings and not hominids. So I hope that is clear to you, because it is something that has always bothered me with history, where we try to validate the things that are going on based on someone's theory, and we bend our history to fit someone else's theory, and that's not something that we should be doing. I think that the other thing is, a lot of people don't realize how many artifacts and things that are in Africa that showcase early man. It's not just the bones of the people. It's also, like I said, the insect repellent bedding that we found that's 77,000 years old. The beads and artifacts that were found in South Africa in caves that are 75,000 years old, that represent and show that these people who are highly skilled human beings in being able to create and design things for their clothing, and paintings and things that or things that they carved into the walls. The Blombos cave engravings are a great example of that. The Aldovo Gorge in Tanzania, you can see stone tools that date back 2.6 million years. On and on and on and on, we are presented with evidence that suggests and tells us that Africa is, in fact, the cradle of, or the birth of humanity. And many, many writers and authors and people have written about this to validate that. But when you are talking about it as a young person in your school, when you're talking about it with someone as you're discussing history, and people want to know, well, how do you know? Because I've heard the lie as I grew up, oh, life started everywhere. Well, that is not true. That is not true. If DNA and genetics have taught us anything, and you need to get my book, right, because we talked about that, it has taught us about migration patterns. We can see how people traveled and how they moved, right? And how they went from place to place. It is not something that we need to be hiding or feel embarrassed about, or feel that we can't challenge. We need to be challenging those things, because a lot of the history that is being put out here is fantasy, because people don't go in and do the actual work. The actual work. I've talked about soul insulation on different episodes, and how people in Africa moved, how Africa has 3 different climates, and why people moved from Africa and migrated out. A lot of it had to do with the change in temperature in the upper part of Africa that made people in that area migrate to places like Mesopotamia and further east, right? And we know this, that climates change and people had to adapt, and they had to move. And there is much evidence to suggest why that was, because again, it was a issue of survival. We don't do enough looking at the history behind the climate, because climate change, even though we're talking about climate change right now in this current world, climate change was a major contributor to why Africans had to leave and left areas and traveled and migrated. It wasn't the only reason, but it was a major contributor, because you had to be able to survive. So they went, even Egypt. Why Egypt was such a populous area was because of the Nile River, because of the Wadi Kubanayas, because of the areas in which water and soil could be used to grow and feed animals, thereby allowing you to live within Africa, whereas a lot of things within your immediate vicinity or within your further vicinity were unlivable. Had become deserts, had been dried out. And as you move further south in Africa, you saw different climate changes also, some cold, some warm, and why we had migration patterns in that way. So another thing to think about when we talk about Africa as young people is, well, why, if all life started in Africa, then why did they leave? They left. One of the major reasons is climate change. We know that to be the fact. Now, people will argue with you. They will put their politics into it. But there really is nothing disputable about that. You can't dispute it. Right? Another question that is often asked, why didn't Africans succumb to diseases in the same way that, say, our Native Americans and others did? I was asked this question a couple of years ago, and I always think that it's an important question to bring up, because it's important for you to understand that everything comes from you, right? Plagues and things of that matter. Europe had a lot of interaction with Africa, rather it be Northern Africa, as they came in and they interacted with Africans. But Africans, also went over to Europe, and they also taught them cultural things about cleaning and how to keep the body clean to resist certain diseases, such as malaria and different pathogens that were killing them. As migration patterns continued to the east over thousands of years, as man went east and went other places, he got away from these interactions, these markers in his DNA. And there are different things that happen, like Toba and different things like that, that kind of changed the way that DNA cells were, which made people more susceptible in Native America, the Americas being one of the last places populated in migration patterns. They were highly affected by these things. And it is one of the reasons why when the Portuguese and the Spanish brought slaves over to the New World, they found that the slaves were not, African slaves, were not succumbing to the diseases that the Native Americans succumbed to, thus helping to start and popularize the African slave trade. They were less likely to get sick. They were stronger. Let's just put it clearly. And so this is a part of all of those things. Now, when you're taught in school, most people will tell you that, well, people just came over the Bering Strait and this and that. But these migration patterns and changes in DNA are something that we need to study and things that we need to know about. Because once you understand how DNA, it's here for us to know, we are in the modern world, not in the ancient world, where we can just theorize of what we believe. We can actually prove it through science and show that this, in fact, is what it is. The Europeans, on the other end of that, they were susceptible to more diseases, just like the indigenous people were in the Americas, because they came into Africa and they were confronted with diseases that their migration patterns had taken them away from. And it evolves to something what we call a genetic mutation, right? Where that could be done because of how far you are, the climate and change in which you are. All this is discussed in my book. All of this is in my book, and it's discussed earlier in my book, so that when you start to talk about phenotypic variation and you understand what phenotypic variation is, and you realize that phenotypic variation comes because of changes in environment, climate, and area. Those changes are then going to affect how you deal with diseases and things that now you are exposed to, even though to some extent your genetics still comes from these early Africans. So all of those things are important. It's so much to talk about for our young people. And it's so much that we need to go into because, quite honestly, as I've said, and I keep saying, we're not doing a good job of it. We're not doing a good job of it. The questions that are out here, the things that they really need to have answered, that can give them an establishment of who they are. They seem simple to many of us. The Cradle of Humanity, the migration patterns. Oh, I remember that from school, but how were you taught this? Because majority of the history that we're being taught in schools come from a history of supremacy, where people have taken out very important facts in history simply for the purpose to not give validation or qualifiers to anything that is not European or white. And that's not me just saying that is just the fact. And so when we teach our history to our young people, we have to make sure that we're giving them examples and that we're giving them places to go so that they can go in and find these things themselves and give them something to reference and be proud of. I often say it should not be that the first time when you pick up a history book in history class, that the first time you see someone that looks like you is in chains. That is lunacy. It is foolery. It is inaccurate. It is inaccurate. There are great kingdoms that were established in Africa during the time of Europeans being in the Dark Ages. People who took the knowledge from Africa. It's important. If you wanted to know, you said, all I remember is Cro-Magnon Man, Lucy, Revolutionary War, slavery, Columbus plays, participation. Yeah. I don't remember people in school teaching us about the kingdom of Mali and how rich Mali was. Teaching us about Mansa Musa, the richest man, believe it or not, the richest man ever to exist on the planet. Giving out gold, right? Giving out gold as he was going to Mecca and changing whole financial statuses of kingdoms because the amount of gold that he was sending out. And these tales making their way to Europe, and understanding why when the Regis of Mali left to go sail over into the New World, which they knew that this had happened, they went chasing the gold. They didn't teach us that. They didn't teach us that. They didn't teach us about Timbuktu. They didn't tell us that Timbuktu was a huge place of trade. It was a huge place of culture. Why Mali was so rich and why it was so knowledgeable and why it was leading the world during that time. We don't know about those things because they didn't teach us these things. The scholarship and the manuals, they tell us about the Great Library of Alexandria, and they tell us about Egypt, but they don't tell us the knowledge that came from all parts of Africa. These are important. These are important. And yet, the first time you hear about any Black person being on a boat coming to the New World, it's in a slave ship tied down. Yet we know that when Columbus, as you mentioned Columbus, when he got over, Columbus's own people were told that the Africans came and showed them how to make spears and then lay gold upon their spears, their ceremonial spears. And they named the gold the same way as the Africans had, gave it the same name, guano. These are important. You know, I know that many people um, get mad because on Erudition we don't cover everything that they want us to cover on every episode. But my goal here is so much more than to just touch on someone's talking point. My goal here every Thursday that I'm on is to educate. Is to educate. I think that when we look at empires, and don't get me wrong, there are people who are trying, and I have seen some online, and I support those who do, um, who are trying very hard to teach factual history at a storm of lies, myth, and fantasy. So I want us to do better with that. To do better with that. Tony, you had something else to say up here? I know I didn't want to make this feel like I was just, you said square dance. All they depicted was in chains, and they still teach it that in the time. Yeah, because the understanding is we don't need to know where we come from and who we are and why we got there. Um, but we forget that Europeans uh, ran over to the Americas based on the information that the Portuguese got from the Muslims. And the idea that there was gold, which is why Columbus went to Portugal before he went back to Spain. So all these things are important, um, and they need to be taught. They need to be taught. Um, I don't know. I don't know what you guys give me something else. What do you want else? Do you want me to talk about? What's something else that we could speak on tonight? Yeah, we can speak on tonight. I saw one of the candidates. No, I'm gonna talk about this. I'm gonna talk about this because it kind of angered me earlier this week. Here's the thing. I think I've done more than enough teaching and discussion and uh, information gathering on Columbus than anybody that I know in my current circle. Um, I have I have done that on purpose. right? To hold on a moment. But we have done that. How do we deal with the socioeconomic issues that deter families from teaching their children? Our schools are getting worse with behavior. Well, I will tell you this. One thing that we can never do, right, is that when you know, I give an example. This program right here, uh, there are books out here. There are self-study books out here. There are people who are writing and doing all of that. We have to start that education in our homes, Tony, because here's the thing. If you homeschool your children, pick up that history book that they have, right? Find books like the one that I wrote. Find books like Black History for Beginners and different books that are out here. Start to go through your own history, and you'll get over the idea of teaching, right? The socioeconomic issues, it is hard for you to work a job and go to work and then come home and teach your kids. I get it. But prioritization, it doesn't mean that you got to teach them every day. It doesn't mean that it has to be 5 hours out of the day. An hour of quality study on a subject, on an era, is important. This program is typically an hour, and I cover a lot within that hour. And I throw names out to you. Like I may talk to you about the Songhai Empire. I may talk to you about Mali. I might talk to you about the Catalan Atlas. I may talk to you about Manu Musa. I may talk to you about artifacts and different things. But when you get that information, go in, pull it up. When you get a book that I share with you, and I say, hey, go read Manu Musa and the Empire of Mali. Go read the history of Timbuktu, the role of the Muslim scholar and notables, right? 1400 to I think it was 1800. But if you go, there are different books that are out here that will allow you to grow. Give your child their own particular homework on top of whatever they get in school. Tell your child, okay, so you learned this about George Washington. Did you also know this? Go read this article, or go read this book, or read this chapter to get a better understanding of who George Washington actually was, who Abraham Lincoln was, who Thomas Jefferson was, John Adams, John Quincy Adams, James Madison, James Monroe, right? Any of these presidents who greatly affected how we live in this world. Kids are, no, why it's not clicking. Kids are losing scholarships for smoking weed in dorms. Man, I'm fearful for where this generation will be 20 years and impact on our community. I think that all kids are going to do things because they're young. It is one of the reasons why we have to establish these tendencies and these markers early. We have to give them this information. The earlier we do this, the better. The better. It may take an 18-year-old to go through something before they understand. Malcolm X had a history of crime, but was one of the most affluent autodidacts that you will ever know in history, because once the idea of knowledge hits you and the desire to know hits you, it's who inspires. And sometimes as parents too, we gotta accept something that I think a lot of parents don't accept. Maybe your kid is not going to necessarily gravitate to you teaching them directly. Maybe it will take a pastor, a minister, a youth leader. Maybe it'll take an auntie, an uncle, or somebody who has influence on them. Maybe it'll take them watching a program. I tell people all the time, encourage your kids to watch Erudition, encourage your kids to interact with Erudition, ask questions, learn whatever. And people say, well, I don't know if they're really interested in history. Well, you won't know that. You won't know that until you encourage them. You won't know if you keep saying, well, I don't think that they'll do it. And then get mad because they don't do it on their own. Well, that wasn't going to happen anyway. I sat down with many young men and women throughout my time in the military and teaching them different things. And I can tell you, nobody ever walked up and said, Eddie, teach me this. That wasn't the initial interaction. It was a question or something that was brought up that they didn't understand. And then we went further. And then as we went through that teaching, it opened the door to other new teaching. If you see somebody and they're at a Bible study and you're talking about some story in the Bible, right? And you give them a historical context, like, do you know during this time, to give you an example of what was going on during that time, right? And give them history, something that they could actually lock onto. More importantly, for African Americans, give them African American history. Give them Black history. Give them Black history that aligns them and lets them realize, yeah, your ancestors didn't just show up here in chains. They were kings, queens, leaders of kingdoms. They had knowledge, understanding. They charted the skies. They bought the land up. They created ways of planning and creating that were taken to other countries. They created aqueducts, dams, indoor plumbing. They did surgery. They did dentistry. They created batteries. What were they using batteries for in ancient times? All of these things are facts. And in order for us to push the scholarship, the academic in our children, we got to start it early. Interest them. Nothing will interest you if you go to school. I'm telling you, because we've all been there. And I pick up a history book and everything they talk about is England, Europe, the Renaissance, the Roman Catholic Church, the Crusades, before they ever get to the fact that before all of that happened, life was in Africa. And when we don't give them that, they feel like they expect someone to give them something. And then we allow them to also get caught up in the fantasy of history. People make up fantasies to make history interesting. Did you know that a Black man created this? Did you know that this person was this? And these things a lot of times are non-factual. And then when you go and you dig, you realize, man, the facts are better than the lies that you telling me. But you're telling me these lies because you feel that you want to feel important. Well, I will tell you, you don't have to lie to feel important. You just got to know your history. Know who you are. Know where you come from. Know how your people charted and went around this world. Know that the age of discovery is what is known as the European age of discovery. It does not encompass or take in the voyages of the African Phoenicians or the Africans who went over across the Atlantic, or who sailed on the other side of Africa into the Indian Ocean, or who sailed and went to islands along the Pacific. None of that is taught in the way that it should be taught. And even though the DNA and the migration patterns are showing us exactly how man made his way, even in language with the phonetics, and we look at how language broke down into those areas, we can trace all of that. But very rarely do you hear people teach it. But you got a lot of what I like to call TikTok doctors who are out here telling you things that aren't factual. That aren't factual. We're within 5 minutes of getting ready to close down this episode. I appreciate you, Tony Briscoe, for being with us, man, and asking these questions and putting these things out here. But yeah, I just really truly believe that in order for us to grow, to be better, we got to stop giving ourselves, and I'm not saying we all do it, well, more than enough of us do it, excuses. Because if you're not going out and getting knowledge, I'm reading a book right now called Everything You Love Will Burn. It's about the Klan and the alt-right. And it talks about how this reporter traveled with these folks way before Charlottesville, way before any of this, and what they do in this book is the reporter shows you how all of these talking points, these Rhodesia talking points, these replacement theory talking points, all of these things, and the new idea that the alt-right has, none of this is new. It has a historical marker to it. How they feel that the old Klan is dead, and that in order to establish supremacy, they have to do it in a political way. And then you think back to Hitler, when Hitler wrote Mein Kampf, his struggle, and how he realized that you could not do it through force. You had to take over through politics. Several weeks ago, I did a episode talking about where we are in relation to where the Weimar Republic was during the time of Hitler, and how all of those things were done legally. How Hitler came to power legally, and how he slowly chipped away and took over to make it a dictatorship that then led to the murder of millions of people. It does not. History is something you have to know, or you will repeat it. People think that they're smarter because they say, well, you don't know. There's a reason why we burn books. There's a reason why we ban books. There's a reason why we tell you not to learn certain history. We tell you this because we don't want you to ask the questions that are needed. So you make a very good point. Where will our kids be in 20 years? Where will they be? We're fighting with each other. We're doing crabs in a barrel again. We have migrant people and black people fighting against each other for what? What do they call it? Black jobs. And forgetting that in the 1800s, the draft riots in New York were because of black jobs. That the Irish felt that they were entitled to these menial jobs, and they placed the blacks and the Irish immigrants against each other, and it darn near burned down a city during the Civil War. And the rich people forget that when the Irish could no longer go after the blacks and were killing blacks in the street, they went after the rich. And that's when they sent the Union Army in to squash the rebellion. This is history. This is what it is. And every Thursday, I ask you to utilize this hour. Make it a transformative hour for you. Ask questions. Get on here. Put out information. Challenge what I say. Ask me, well, Eddie, where you get that from? Because you know I'm going to tell you. Grow together. On the back of my wall right here, I have a plaque that I had done for the Erudition Network. Growing knowledge and understanding. And that's the important part. Growing knowledge and understanding. And I think sometimes we focus much on the knowledge part, but the understanding part is a very big part too. Because understanding means that we get to really start to listen to each other. We really start to understand where we come from, who we are, where we're going. It doesn't mean that we all agree every time. It doesn't mean that everything that is said about history, we all go, man, yeah, some things are painful. Some things need to be countered. People have told me things about history and I shake my head because they don't know at that extent yet that what they're saying to me makes no sense. Because they're telling me from something someone told them. And not a fact, not a historically investigated, looked at situation. I'll give you a quick example and I'm going to get off of here tonight. We're talking about the Boston Massacre and Crispus Attucks being a black man who was shot during this upheaval against the King of England and the taxations that were going on. Crispus Attucks was one of the first people shot and killed during the Boston Massacre, right? But when you go and look at what we're taught from historians, conservatives, and everybody else, oh, he was for liberty. They killed him because he was for liberty. He wanted to be free. No, they killed him from the testimony of the actual soldiers because they saw a large black Negro running and throwing ice and having a stick in his hand. They returned that aggression by shooting him dead. They didn't kill him because of his liberty, his desire for liberty. They killed him because they saw him as a threatening black man. And how does that align? This is from their own testimony. Because remember, future President John Adams was their lawyer that defended them. He's the one that was quoted as saying facts are stubborn things. And that is the fact. How you perceive history, how you take in history, how you're taught history. We see Crispus Attucks in the art along with the white people charging, but that wasn't the case. Attucks was an escaped slave. Matter of fact, we have historic have the reference of his owner looking for him and wanting to put him back into slavery. They killed him for a different reason. But history aligns us and tells us a completely different story. This is what I mean by learning your history, engaging in it, understanding it, and then how does it relate to us today? How is the similarity? How are things so much? They're almost the same. Hundreds of years, centuries, and we're still forging in the dark. But that's the reason why we do this program. Tony Briscoe, thank you for being with us. Eric Jackson, thank you for joining us. I'm going to get out of here, ladies and gentlemen. God willing, I'll be back here next week with you. I'm sorry that I missed last week. Sometimes I have to take a break from this because I get discouraged sometimes too. I get tired sometimes too. And sometimes things just come up. But I really enjoy these sessions. Please share. I will put out a Mapify of this program that I usually do now for every program. I am also starting to label my programs a little bit better. We usually have them just as the Erudition Network, whatever. But as you'll see tonight, this one was predominantly for Africa and kids, and I put that out. If you go through our YouTube channel, you'll start to see, as my wife does hers also, she usually has a title. It will be a title on it that will give you an idea. And on our Facebook pages and our Facebook group pages and main page, there will be a Mapify that will break down or summarize everything that we talked about during the episode to make it easier for you to follow along and look at as you sit down with your family to watch these episodes. Just certain things that we're doing to try to make this a little easier for everybody as we follow along. All right, I'm gonna get out of here. Again, you all be blessed. God keep you safe over this weekend. Hopefully the weather will not be so hard in the country as it has been over the last few weeks. It gives some of us a time for a breather and to be able to just, go into this fall, this winter safely. All right, I'm going to get out of here. You all be blessed. And as always, join us on the Erudition Network each week on our different programs. It is on Monday. The boys haven't been on, but they usually are on Wednesday. And I am here on Thursdays. We will see you during those times. Be blessed.